The student campus protests against Israel's war on Gaza trigger a chain reaction across the globe. From the UK and Europe to Asia and beyond, students are defying authorities, setting up encampments, and joining the chorus condemning Israel's actions. We speak to a group of students in the UK demanding their universities divest from Israel. But are their calls for change being heard? And we hear from one faculty member who says freedom of speech on UK campuses is under attack. Hello, I'm Ghida Fakhry. Welcome to Bigger Than Five, where we look at the wave of campus protests spreading across the globe, fueled by Israel's assault on Gaza. Undeterred by the crackdown in the US, students around the world are now also calling for their universities to cut ties with Israel. In the UK, more than 20 protest encampments have sprung up at major universities including Oxford, Cambridge, and a number of London institutions. While students' protests in Britain have remained largely peaceful, elsewhere in Europe, the response has been at times brutal, with arrests in the Netherlands, France, and Germany. But students have vowed to continue fighting regardless of the consequences and until they achieve justice for the people of Palestine.
As a movement, we are committed to stay here until all our demands are being met, and personally, I'm willing to stay here for as long as it takes.
This is a question of humanity. This is not a question of religion. It is a question of humanity.
They keep sending the police on us, riot police, every single mobilisation, and I'm here along with the rest of my comrades to show my support, to show that it will not be done in my name.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
The student movement continues to gain traction across the world, from Switzerland to Australia, from Japan to Cuba. The demand for a ceasefire and for divestment from Israel is getting louder.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
In Europe, the student movement saw a major success at Dublin's Trinity College. Students there agreed to end their encampment after the university pledged to sever ties with Israeli companies. But here in London, the fight goes on.
My name is Giovanni. I'm an MA politics student at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and an active member of Goldsmiths for Palestine, a student-led campaign that was born in October, shortly after the beginning of the genocide. Following an initial phase of reluctance from the part of the university to engage with our demands, and after our most recent round of escalations, the management team of this university found itself forced to make a series of written concessions, which includes a promise to review their current ethical investment policy, as well as the institution of a Palestinian scholarship, which will be the first undergraduate scholarship in this country.
Let's take a closer look now at what is motivating the students. What is it about the Palestinian cause that has inspired them? And what will they do if their demands are not met? James, your university, University College London, was the first to set up an encampment here in London. What were you and other students like you at UCL motivated by?
I think it's really important to situate the current encampment and the encampment moment in a wider 8-month-long protest movement that started in response to the ongoing genocide in Palestine. As UCL Action for Palestine, which is a group that I'm part of, we have a good reach in the student body. We've been organising protests, walkouts, teach-ins since October, and that escalated into a 34-day-long occupation from March until April, which resulted in our first meeting with the provost. So we've been motivated since October to be holding our university to account, and while this occupation moment is incredibly important and it's bringing a lot of media attention, I think it's important to centre the fact that it doesn't begin or end with encampments, and it doesn't begin or end with the UK or the US.
You're also a student at UCL. What are your key demands and how unified are you with other universities?
Our demands from the beginning have been responding to the call that Palestinian civil society makes of us to disrupt our institutions and calling for them to totally cut ties with Israeli apartheid and what is now Israeli genocide. And at UCL, our key demand, we can't word it as divestment, but it's the cutting of all ties with financial and other entities that are complicit. So this also includes heeding the call for an academic boycott, which is the foundational call of the BDS movement. UCL in December announced a research partnership with Tel Aviv University. So one of our key demands is to demand UCL to cut ties with Tel Aviv. A UCL alumnus, Dr. Rifat al-Arir, was also martyred in his home in Gaza in December. And so a lot of our campaign has also revolved around honoring him. And in his honor, attempting to establish scholarships and sanctuary for Palestinian students and academics at our university.
Tom, you're a PhD student at SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. What does this movement represent for you beyond the war in Gaza?
I think in general, it's just about students, taking the lead in these movements, like we've seen the parallels, the memes, comparing what's going on now to protesting apartheid in the Vietnam War, South African apartheid that is. And it's rare for students to be wrong in cases of morality. They usually are really at the forefront of these movements. And as James mentioned, the level of organisation now is incredible.
And this has been such a global international movement. Yara, you are a student at UCL. You are Palestinian. What is it about the Palestinian cause and what is going on right now in Gaza that has so electrified students from different backgrounds, different nationalities across the world and here in the UK as well?
Yeah, so I think students have now recognised, even though they did before, but I think since the genocide began, students have recognised and exposed the logic of Zionism and imperialism at their universities. So I'm Palestinian and I'm an alumnus of SOAS and I'm currently at UCL. And I've always kind of been aware since I started at SOAS how SOAS has been complicit in the colonial and imperialist project. So SOAS was actually established in 1916 and they were actually established to train colonial administration and colonial officers in understanding, it's in the name, Oriental and African Studies. So they actually gain this regional expertise and then train military officers. And this isn't something that's a legacy. I can't even say it's a legacy because it actually has been going on till now when we're seeing the links to the Zionist project. And we see that SOAS and UCL continue to support the genocidal project against Palestinians in Gaza and the whole of Palestine. So as a Palestinian, I'm from Nablus and I'm also from a village called Tirat Haifa, which is near the city of Haifa. And SOAS actually has a partnership with the University of Haifa. And the University of Haifa is actually located on stolen land, on the colonized land of Mount Carmel, which the population went from 61,000 to 4,000. And now we're commemorating the Nakba, 76 years. And it's really important to recognize that the reason that the population decreased, we need to contextualize that's because of massacres and because of forced expulsion at the time. So me, as a Palestinian student from Haifa, I'm going to SOAS, and I know that there is this partnership, and we are calling for an academic boycott.
Bushra, as a student of Iraqi and Irish descent, how much of this for you has to do with the wider struggle against injustice, colonialism, and imperialism?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, it's important to acknowledge the continuities in all anti-colonial struggles, but I think it's also important to decenter identity when we're talking about why there is mass mobilization for the cause of Palestinian liberation. None of us are here because of our identities. We are here because we believe in liberation and we believe in decoloniality. As an Iraqi, however, I do think there are some really important continuities to do with the repression and policing of student activism that we're seeing. So the same way that Prevent was used in the 2000s to repress anti-war and more kind of radical sentiments around the time of the Iraq War, it's being used, the same kind of discourses are being used now to intimidate pro-Palestinian protesters on all of our campuses. Similarly, as Yara said, a lot of our institutions are embedded within structures of coloniality, and UCL was actually the birthplace of eugenics, which lends itself extremely well to Zionism. And it is a process, it is a logic of racial domination and of racial ethnic cleansing, essentially. And so through a decolonial politics, I think it's very clear the need for us to disrupt our institutions and to continue to do so for the cause of Palestine.
How much of a long shot is it, James, do you believe, to get the universities not only to open up and be more transparent about their links to companies that do business with Israel, but to actually do something about it, to listen to your demands, to divest?
Yeah, I think it's very important, like similar to how Busher has been speaking about the continuities in our protest movement. We very much see ourselves as another step in an ongoing student protest movement. We're very lucky to have inherited very important information, like, for example, complicity reports on UCL's entanglement with arms companies from prior UCL student protest movements. And we are not solely focused on winning. Our aim is to have our demands met, but we will not stop just because they have not been met. Our movement continues to grow every day, and we recognise that the more pressure that students put on their institutions, the less opportunity they have to ignore us.
How forthcoming, Yara, have the universities been? Because according to the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, UK universities collectively invest around £430 million in companies complicit in Israeli violations of international law. Some universities still refuse to divulge and provide any breakdowns of their investments. What have you found in terms of the response of management at your university?
Funnily enough, SOAS did release an email to all students and staff disclosing their investments, but yet on their investment portfolio, they still had complicit companies on the list. So to us, we know that one of our demands has been to disclose all of their investments and all of their ties to the Zionist entity. However, to us, it's not enough to just disclose and to be transparent. There has to be accountability and for them to divest completely from all of their ties in the genocidal project.
What about the narrative that we keep hearing, whether it's to do with the way the UK media or British politicians or even the leaderships at these universities describe what's going on? We hear a lot of talk of anti-Semitism going on at some of the universities. As a PhD student in linguistics, Tom, language is particularly important in how you craft a narrative. How would you describe what you hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ridiculous. I don't even particularly want to speak to the anti-Semitism claims because I don't really want to add fuel to that fire. I think either you're against colonialism or you're not. And I think to build on what these guys have already said, in terms of not stopping, if you don't win, part of the thing that we have to reconcile with is that it's not like everyone is pro-Palestinian. At our universities, it's not just what they invest as institutions. You have academics who have made a whole career of being decolonial, post-colonial academics, and yet they haven't said a word about Palestine. And so we need to make it so shameful and such a untenable position to even, it can't just be that you're pro-Palestine, you have to be really speaking out against colonialism and not just resting on your laurels. And I think that's what these student movements, as they're growing, are really achieving, because it's becoming more and more of a fringe position. And in terms of the wider narratives, I think, it's all hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy from these academics who don't speak out against it. It's hypocrisy from the media who, claim free speech and whatnot, and yet don't want to hear about anti-colonial narratives. It's like, this is actual colonialism. In 50 years, we'll all be looking back thinking, how did it get this far? It will be like the way we look back on South African apartheid right now, or Jim Crow in the US. It's like, it's obvious at that level. It's obvious to us. And people who want to pull the wool over their own eyes, they'll sadly be remembered for it.
I'd also like to add that I think it's really important to remember the value and the importance of the voice of anti-Zionist Jewish students in our movement. Across the world, we've seen huge numbers of Jewish people join the movement, and in our university as well. And I think it's really important that we don't erase their contribution.
Do you think the movement will continue beyond the summer once you break up for the holidays?
I wholeheartedly trust the commitment of students across the world. That this is not a moment. This is a decolonial movement, as others have said. This is the new normal. Like we are trying to build better institutions. These are institutions that are supposed to educate us. This is not only a genocide that Israel is perpetrating in Gaza, but it's also a scholasticide. It's the calculated destruction of academic institutions. There's not a single university left in Gaza. Over 80% of schools have been either fully or partially destroyed. Over 200 educators have been killed, and over 5,500 students have been killed. And as university students, we cannot stay silent on this.
And Tom, as someone who's converted to Islam, just how much of a role has that played in your perspective and in your decision to protest alongside the pro-Palestine demonstrators?
I think, as Bushra mentioned earlier, I don't want to centre my identity. I think, every weekend we're out there with Christians, Jewish people. The Jewish bloc is like one of the biggest blocs and the national marches. For me personally, it provides a sense of comfort because every time I go to the mosque, everyone there is pro-Palestine. And, the teachings of Islam are really pro-justice. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, if you see injustice in the world, you change it with your hands. If you can't change it with your hands, you change it with your tongue. And if you can't change it with your tongue, you change it with your heart. And so that's really just what I try and live by. And try and deliver the liberation however long it takes for the people of Palestine.
Finally, Yara, to you, how important is it to always refocus and recenter this issue on Gaza and what's going on there?
It's extremely crucial because some of the narrative has been that students in Britain have been responding to students in the US. But first of all, we're not in solidarity with students in the US. This is the same struggle. And we're not responding to other students, we're responding to the conditions on the ground in Palestine. So we need to be remembering why we're actually here and what the purpose of these encampments are. We're not just camping out for fun, we're camping out to achieve our political demands. And that is, we also need to remember that Zionism is a global phenomenon and we need to counter it from wherever we are.
All right, Yara, Tom, James, and Bushra, thank you all so much for being with us and being part of this program. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Here in Britain, students have had considerable support from staff and faculty members, with hundreds signing letters in solidarity. But how much support are they getting from the institutions themselves? And is there truth to claims that universities are trying to silence pro-Palestinian voices? Lucia Pradella is a faculty member at King's College London and chair of its branch of the University and College Union. Dr. Pradella, you just heard some of the university students express their deep solidarity with Palestinians, their deep commitment to the Palestinian cause. How important is it for faculty members like you to support the student protest movement?
Well, I think it was very inspiring to listen to the students and their motivation and their strong commitment to anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism, and anti-racism. And I think that many staff members like myself are very grateful to the students and what they are doing to create a space in universities to start discussing important topics by raising crucial questions about divestment and complicity and solidarity to our colleagues and fellow students in Palestine.
But how much space is there on UK university campuses for this debate, for these discussions? Because you've criticized what you say are efforts to silence the expression of solidarity with Palestine on British university campuses. You have called them dangerous. You've said they can and must be resisted. How do you resist them?
So what we've witnessed after the 7th of October has been a massive political mobilization by the political establishment and also by university management to limit the space to express solidarity towards the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. So we had the Minister of Interior, for example, Suella Braverman, who tried to criminalize even basic expression of Palestinian identity, like the Palestinian flag. There has been a lot of debate about the from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, for example, slogan. And then we saw the Minister of Universities contacting the vice principals and basically encouraging them to prioritize the so-called welfare of Jewish students, but with the intention exactly to limit the space to express solidarity to Palestinians.
And you've said there's been a crisis of expression in the United Kingdom, that in many cases universities have aligned with the Zionist narrative and that management has even refused to mention the word Palestine. How much pushback has there been among your colleagues against these efforts to silence you?
I think there has been a big pushback. On the one side, I think the UK is probably the country with the biggest anti-war and pro-Palestine movement. We had 12 national marches with hundreds of thousands of people participating in each of them. And there has been a trade union bloc where university workers have actually participated in relatively big numbers. And I think there has been also a pushback in terms of workplace action. For example, there have been several, I think at my workplace, there have been like 7 walkouts organized by staff.
And you've been very active in coordinating many of these walkouts, certainly at your university, King's College. What drives you to do the work that you do?
I think Palestine is the cause of the oppressed and exploited all over the world. So Palestine has always had an important place in the struggles of the labor movement and the progressive struggles all over the world. Personally, I think there are 2 main issues. The first is that, of course, there is a political issue about the orientations and the complicity, not just of the UK government, but Western governments in how they're backing this genocide and how this affects all of us in our societies. And so, especially if I can just speak from a personal point of view, if you are researching and teaching social justice, imperialism, liberation, etc. Of course, it's really a priority also from a kind of intellectual point of view, not just a political point of view, and a moral point of view as well.
Let me ask you about the narrative that tends to paint many of the protesters as anti-Semitic. In this country, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, said he expected universities to take a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism. Just how serious is this issue on UK campuses?
I think there is a problem in UK universities, which is the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, that very often conflates expression of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And I think this kind of definition is problematic, and as a union we have fought against this definition, and it is also problematic because it doesn't allow us to identify what is real anti-Semitism. So I don't want to downplay the issue, but I think the way in which it has been framed is very problematic.
How would you characterize the response of universities, the management at universities? Are they taking protesters' rights and demands as seriously as you'd like them to?
Well, I don't think, no, I would say they are not taking it as seriously or are not reacting in the way that they should. I think, for example, now management should meet the students, should respond to their demands, should engage seriously in negotiations. What I can say is that we have been involved in negotiations around divestment and rescinding partnerships with Israeli universities for quite a long time, for several months now. I think there are also issues about criminal liability that have been raised by, for example, the Center for Justice for Palestinians. I also want to talk about this ideological dimension, for example, the refusal to acknowledge the Palestinian identity. For example, at King's College London, where one of our alumni Dr. Maysara Arayes was killed by an Israeli airstrike, and management refused to say that he was Palestinian and then refused to say that he was killed by an Israeli airstrike. I find it's shameful that they wouldn't condemn the targeted killing of health workers, and in this way also put the lives of hundreds of Palestinian health workers who are currently abducted and are in Israeli prisons, putting their lives at risk, because we need university management to condemn this act of violence, because if we condone this violence will continue.
Dr. Lucia Pradella, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Ghida.
It's been described as the student spring, this conscious and globally interconnected movement, which has seen encampments at different corners of the world sharing the same ideas and fighting for the same cause. Students are expressing their democratic rights by creating safe and peaceful spaces to protest and by calling for fairness, justice, transparency, and accountability. But how long can they continue to fend off the significant political pressures they face and counter the narrative that characterizes them as anti-Semitic and a threat to civil society? And how many more will have to endure the crushing physical attacks against them? For now, the students insist they're going nowhere, and that their fight for Palestinian liberation against the forces of oppression and imperialism will go on. From me, Ghida Fakhry, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.